And it is my pleasure now to introduce to you my colleague and today's keynote speaker, Sue Miller-Taei. Sue is part Samoan Kiwi, and she has lived and worked in Samoa, New Zealand, and the Pacific Island region for more than 30 years. She has supported, designed, and led many conservation initiatives, including for marine mammals, turtles, invasive species, birds, large and small-scale protected areas, and the Forum Leaders Pacific Oceanscape. The Pacific Oceanscape focuses on a vision that Sue shares for integrated ocean and island management across domains and founded in cultures, people, and the relationship with nature. She has worked extensively in the Pacific Islands and notably as a technical advisor for the region's first large-scale marine protected area, the Kiribati-Phoenix Islands Protected Area. She has advocated on issues of climate change and the ocean, including maritime boundary concerns for sea level rise, impact, and ocean acidification. The use of science has been a foundational to all these efforts, particularly to inform marine policy and decision-making, and has been a basis for her contribution to many international, regional, and national initiatives. Sue has worked in the region for Conservation International since 2005, and is currently their Executive Director for the New Zealand and Pacific Oceanscape Program, based out of the University of Auckland. Sue was recognized for her efforts in conservation and the use of science with SCB's Varroa Award in 2015. So now we're going to shift our focus from Southeast Asia and South Asia and look towards the Pacific, where Sue will talk about going to scale in ocean conservation. So please help me welcome Sue.
Thank you. Hello Conservation Asia. Malo sefua, malo ni, aloha, kamna ni mari, ali'i, talofalava, kiorana, malo kataki, kulo malulo, kiora, tena koto, tena koto, tena koto katoa. Hello Conservation Asia. I bring you warm greetings from your neighbours in the east, the Pacific Islands region, a network of over 25,000 islands nestled in the world's largest ocean. I'd like to begin by thanking the organisers and particularly Annette for seeking me out. I don't often travel outside of my region these days, getting a bit old. And I'd like to also thank the local organising committee and also Chester Gann, because we had so many emails just trying to register the online system when you're working in places like Taurua and Kiribati, where the internet is probably 100th of the fraction that you have in this university here in Singapore, can be a challenge. So it never actually worked for me to register. So I was quite happy when I got here yesterday and my name was on the list, and I'd like to congratulate the local organising committee and all the organisers for such a wonderfully well-organised meeting. And to you, Conference Chair Edward Webb, I'd like to especially shout out to the National University of Singapore, NUS. I'm more used to saying NUS as the National University of Samoa. Perhaps out of this conference we can find some twinning relationships and collaboration that you mentioned, because I found out also that you have an interest and love of Samoa with your work in American Samoa. I'd also like to thank the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation. This is a pretty new group to me, perhaps because I work more in the marine realm, but when I look at the silhouette of your wonderful logo, I sort of think it looks a little bit like a coral. And Society for Conservation Biology, thank you so much. As I become more involved with this society, and indeed I leave tomorrow night to join the Society of Conservation Biology Oceania Section Conference in Brisbane, I'm really impressed by the SCB. They are a practical and energetic network of conservation scientists and practitioners, and it's great to be part of that network. Indeed, congratulations to you all for organising and being here in this conference, and thank you to all in the room for taking the time to listen to an ocean person. I can see that this conference is very terrestrial in nature, and I hope that I can divert your attention for a few minutes to think about the wider ocean that is your neighbour and indeed part of Asia. My name is Miller-Taei. I'm a part Samoan Kiwi. The thing you need to know about me, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm an islander by heart, an islander by nature, by my own nature. I know my heritage in the region. My ancestors come from Manono, from Morea, from Savaii, from Upolu, from Aotearoa, and a few islands a little bit further north called England, Scotland and Wales in the Indian Ocean. Indeed, I'm often called a fruit salad, and I'm like many in our ocean in that I draw strengths from a mix of heritage and cultures. So it's no wonder I felt quite at home arriving in Singapore, a fellow island nation, and again I'd like to thank you for inviting me, and to all the local Singaporeans that have organised this conference. I know what it's like to organise big conferences. It's a lot of work. Whaftai tele lava. So on to the presentation I'm going to give you today, a bit of a voyage. Firstly, as you heard, I work for Conservation International, at least for the last 10 years. I've also worked, I think, for a range of bingos, big NGOs and small ones, IUCN, worked with TNC, worked with WWF. I guess when you get to my age, you end up wearing a few hats. I've also had the privilege to work with many governments, small governments, and also for intergovernmental organisations. CI works in a range of countries around the world and places. My patch is mostly aquatic. You can see it here. Not a small area of island and ocean. Indeed, it's about 40 million square kilometres. Our work in the region for Conservation International is completely aligned to the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Initiative called the Framework for a Pacific Oceanscape. That's the general area there. No, it's not a hard and fast line in terms of, in terms of this boundary. Of course, that's not a real line in the ocean, and I am going to talk to you a bit about lines in the ocean. But that's the general area, inclusive of islands, territorial seas, exclusive economic zones, seabeds, and the high seas. And indeed, we are your neighbour. We're in your neighbourhood, Asia, and we have many links, notably in things I'm going to talk about tonight, such as tuna fishery. How big is the area? Just to give you a bit of an example, the area of the Pacific Oceanscape that the forum leaders work with is larger than the size of the moon. About 15 million square miles, about 40 million square kilometres. It's larger than the surface of the moon, yet we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about this area in the Pacific. I hope a decade will change that. So to this presentation, I'm going to give you a bit of an outline, or to take some marine terms, a voyage, a sail plan in the Pacific. I'm going to give you a little bit of context about UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea. And I'm going to talk about change in our ocean, change with the advent of large-scale MPAs as an example. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into Kiribati's Phoenix Islands protected area. Who's heard of the nation of Kiribati? That's great. Who's ever been to Kiribati? It's not so great. I hope you get there one day. But I'll be using the Phoenix Islands protected area, fictionally known as the PIPA, as an example of this last decade of massive change in the way in our region that we are seeing, using and interacting with our ocean. I use possessive words in this because I believe that humans are part of nature, not apart from nature, and the issues of ownership, to me, are one of the keys for conservation to inspire investment and stewardship. I'll end by giving a few key lessons of what we've observed, and where this might go for our ocean's future. Firstly, let's go for a voyage in the Pacific. I can't resist putting some pretty pictures. The Pacific Islands region is the home of the world's most extensive, near-pristine coral reefs left on our planet. It is the home of the largest tuna resources left in our planet. Maybe that's not such an auspicious title because we really have stuffed up a lot of the other tuna stocks in different oceans. It is home to millions of sharks, new species, the world's largest remaining populations of turtles. Indeed, this becomes a bit of a theme in the Pacific. We have the world's largest remainingness. I hope that we don't always have that title and that other regions can invest in recovery. We are a network of thousands and thousands of islands, from atolls that lie on the ocean when you fly over them, like this one from Kiribati, that look like necklaces, that are incredibly vulnerable in this day and age to impacts of climate change, to populations of millions and millions of seabirds, frigate birds, Phoenix Islands petrel, extensive coral reefs not immune to the effects of bleaching, and to the deep sea, an area that we've hardly even begun to look at. We are home to the highest concentration of seamounts. Less than 1% have even been looked at. And an array of biodiversity that each time someone goes or a group goes to a seamount, hundreds of new species are found. And we're also home to the world's largest concentration of mineral in the seabed. And don't let anyone tell you that these are dead areas. They are not. That picture in the top left shows manganese nodules and a new species that I've, in my nervousness giving this talk, I've forgotten the name. But the deep sea and seamounts, the abyssal plains, in fact the entire ocean in this region is so little known. Every time we explore there, we find so much. But we have explored a lot in this region in terms of exploiting it. This region, as I mentioned, is the home of the world's last remaining tuna stocks. Who eats tuna on a regular basis, out of a can or fresh? If you eat tuna, I'm sure you've eaten, if you eat tuna in Asia, I'm sure you have eaten tuna from the Pacific Islands region. And I'll come back to tuna and what's happening with tuna shortly. To me, this photo gives a quintessential view of islands, or a healthy island and association, ocean or seascape and coastal area, where islands are part of the system, not a part. And I do note this conference is very much on landscapes. I would hope that you broaden your purview of this to think about the associated seascapes. As a Pacific Islander, we don't, in culture, distinguish between the land and sea. Tenures go from ridge to reef in most Pacific Island cultures. And I think it's a mistake to separate them, both in conservation practice, in science, and in other forums. We should be thinking about a continuum from ridge to reef to ocean. So this wonderful island region, more than 25,000 islands nestled like a jewel in a crown of the world's largest ocean, an ocean on which everybody in this room, whether you've been in it or not, actually depends on. The Pacific Ocean is the ocean that really drives our weather. It holds a lot of our remaining biodiversity and a lot of our food commodities. But this is the map that we see mostly of the Pacific these days, these lines in the ocean. These lines in the ocean illustrate exclusive economic zones, EEZs. And they are fiercely fought over both here and indeed everywhere in the world. And it's this picture of the nations, of these not small island states, but large ocean developing states that I want you to leave with today. Because indeed, if you see all of our countries, you must not just see us as dotted islands in an ocean, you must see us in our entire domain, and that includes the ocean. And indeed, the Pacific Islands region, we are the world's largest group of large ocean states. And the ocean surrounds us, connects us, it is part of our domain, and it's key to our future. So how do we get these lines in the ocean? I'd like to move just to a little bit of a context about UNCLOS, or the law of the sea, because I want us to go back in time before I talk about this decade of change to understand what happened in the 70s and early 80s. The law of the sea, UNCLOS, was negotiated heavily in the late 70s, signed in 1982, and became effective in 1994. It is a large, complicated international convention. Before UNCLOS, rights to ocean domain were limited largely to the territorial sea. And I'm not sure if you're aware that the territorial sea, for the most part, has only ever gone to 3 nautical miles. And you may not be aware, but why did we pick 3 nautical miles as a civilization, as a planet? There was quite an interesting story behind that. It's the cannon shot. That's how far at the time that cannons could shoot. So that's how far you could control your ocean domain. That now has become law as territorial seas. For indeed, in most parts of the world, including our region, the territorial sea goes out to 3 nautical miles and out to 12 in certain circumstances. But it came from the cannon shot. But in the late 70s and 1982, there was a move to claim more domain. And in UNCLOS, in the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, a coastal state has been given sovereign rights and actually responsibilities, if you read the full convention, for the purpose of exploring and exploiting, conserving and managing the natural resources. If there's one thing you take away from my talk tonight, I'd like you to take away these 4 words, because they apply to any nation that has ocean domain. The words of it: to explore, to exploit, to conserve, to manage. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, no nation on this planet has really, in my view, fulfilled the rights and the responsibilities of what was envisioned under UNCLOS. I'll give you Sue's rating for our region. We'll explore. I mentioned earlier, basically, from looking at the data at a high level, it looks like we've explored maybe just under 1% of the Pacific Oceanscape or Islands region. That is a very small percentage. We are very limited in our region with scientific capacity. It's high cost to do work on the ocean often, and we rely on technology transfer and partnerships. We're rating at 1%. I wonder of the countries you're from, what rating you would put on your EEZ or in your region. Moving on to exploiting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, like many countries in the world, I'd say exploiting, we'd give a mark of 100%. For indeed, there is not one nation in our region or territory that is linked to France, USA, or others that has not claimed its exclusive economic zone. Indeed, there is no coastal state in the world that has not claimed an exclusive economic zone. And those zones have been heavily exploited, notably for fisheries to date, and are fiercely fought over. And in our region, access to them for tuna fisheries, and now increasingly for access to seabed minerals, are also being fiercely fought over. So exploiting, if we take the indicator of claiming an EEZ and charging fees for access to it, my region gets about 100%. Conserving. Now that's interesting. I would hesitate, up until the last decade, basically there's been no real effort to conserve ocean domain in our region, or indeed most of the world, and I'll come back to that. And managing, yes, if there's any forthright fisheries biologists, I'm sure you'll put your hand up and say, yes, we manage our EEZ, we have fisheries plans, we have this. Yes, there has been management, but it's in boxes. It's in boxes called tuna. It's in boxes called minerals. It's in boxes underneath the convention itself that are not linked at all. Now, if you had one of these EEZs, let's just pick one. Any one that you like, let me see. Point is not. Here we go, Federated States of Micronesia. Pretty large EEZ, over 3.6 million square kilometres. Why wouldn't you plan and manage what you own, together with those rights and responsibilities? It might seem an obvious question, but for most parts of the world, this question has not been answered, and the vision of UNCLOS has not been fulfilled. And the need for integrated management has never been more so than now, because please remember, back in the 70s, I can see many young faces, you were either not born or were at school, but I was beginning my career late 70s. At that time, nobody talked climate change, nobody talked sea level rise, nobody talked ocean acidification. It wasn't thought about. UNCLOS was designed in the absence of concern about climate change. And today, climate change is one of the biggest issues for our ocean, both the radiative effects, sea level rise and warming, and the pollutant effects of increasing carbon dioxide in terms of ocean acidification. So never before, and this is my premise of this talk, do we need to get the balance right in management. Never before do we need to really implement the vision of UNCLOS, which, please, if you're interested in the ocean, take some time to read that document. Never before have we needed to balance exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing. So I said explore in our region less than 1%, exploit, we're running at about 100%. Conserve is changing in the last 10 years. From about 0, if you look at the whole ocean domain, or well less than 1%, we're tracking up in the Pacific to nearly 5. And managing not just in our traditional boxes in our sectors, but managing in an integrated way. So change has come in our region in the last 10 years. And I'm going to give one example under the oceanscape about the advent of large-scale marine protected areas. And by large-scale marine protected areas, I mean sites that are designated that are over 100,000 square kilometres. It doesn't mean total marine reserve. They can be a total reserve through to a large multiple use scale marine protected area. I mentioned that UNCLOS was being talked about in 1975, in the 1970s and through to the 80s, and came into force in the 90s. So I want to give you a bit of a journey of large-scale MPAs. Back in 1975, the first one declared in territorial seas was the Great Barrier Reef MPA. I would doubt that any tourist visiting Australia hasn't heard of the Great Barrier Reef MPA. I would doubt that any Australian hasn't heard of the Great Barrier Reef MPA. I think it generates $40 billion of direct and indirect income every year. Unfortunately, the latest report for coral bleaching in the strong El Nino year showed that 93% of the corals are bleached. But the first one in 1975, hooray, a large-scale MPA, 340,000 square kilometres or so. How much protection did it have when it was created? Anyone want to guess? In terms of real protection, any Aussies in the audience? Who would give me a number? 1975, the world's first large-scale MPA. How much protection did it afford? Surprisingly, 0. It took more than 8 years to get to around 3%. Today it's running at more than 30, and it exemplifies a lot of learning in spatial marine management and in uses for tourism and conservation and science. Let's go forward 10 years, 1985. I was certainly working then, finished one degree, about to finish another. Still just the Great Barrier Reef MPA. And by the way, I'm being a bit cheeky with the map template showing the EZs, because of course a lot of those weren't really in existence then. But bear with me in this story. 1985, go Aussies, Great Barrier Reef. 1995, I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience then were starting to work or finish their degrees. Go Aussies, just the Great Barrier Reef. 2005. Now that's not so long ago. That's just over a decade. Still just the Great Barrier Reef. 2015, just a little over 6 months ago, and there's been an ocean of change, much of it in the Pacific Ocean. And I think it's a positive change. It's a change that is requiring work by a lot of governments, NGOs, communities. And I'd like to highlight some to you quickly that are part of the region that I work in. So the first site that was declared as a large-scale MPA for the oceanscape was the Phoenix Islands, in the heart of the Pacific and belonging to Kiribati. We then had New Caledonia declare its domain as the Coral Sea Park, and it's well underway into 3-year management planning cycle. Not to be outdone, our friends in the Cook Islands, the most island-diverse place on the planet, designated half their EEZ in 2012 as the Cook Islands Marine Park, then to become known subsequently as the Marae, a shared place, Moana, the ocean, Marae Moana. Just last month, they took a step back and decided what they were doing should apply to their whole domain, so that map is out of date. And in fact, the entire Cook Islands domain, ridge to reef to ocean, including how they act upon the high seas and seabed, is now under a Marae Moana policy, and now they're moving to legislation. Palau, another one. They're shutting down within 5 years over 80% of their exclusive economic zone to any exploitation pressure whatsoever, and keeping 20% around their islands prioritised for local fishing, including tourism action. They have an extensive network of terrestrial and coastal marine protected areas. They've taken that learning and they're applying it to their whole domain. The United States, not to be left behind. One of the early sites designated along with Pippa in 2006 at the beginning of this decade of change. Expanded from the first Northwest Hawaiian Islands, much smaller coral ecosystem reserve, to become Papahana mo Kuakea. I won't ask you to repeat that pronunciation, but Papa, as we affectionately call her, and Pippa became the first sister sites under the oceanscape in this region. So this map, in a decade, starting in 2006, has changed and is changing fast now as countries wake up and realise they have this domain. Why wouldn't you plan and manage what you own, especially when it's under increasing pressure? I'll take you for a little bit, watching the time, of a journey into the site that I've been associated with, the Phoenix Islands. After 3 in Kiribati, in the heart of the Pacific, after 3 scientific expeditions pre-2005 and 2006, Kiribati, in partnership with Conservation International and the New England Aquarium, declared then what was the world's largest MPA, the Phoenix Islands Protected Area. None of these things happen overnight, and the momentum in the last decade is preceded by a lot of learning. And if you're working in any of these sites, be it terrestrial or marine protected areas, there's a saying in Tongan, which I won't repeat in Tonga, but it means look back before you move forward. So I'd like to give you a little bit of a history of what I call from catastrophe to conservation in the story of the Pippa. Pippa belongs to the government of Kiribati. It is about, in this part of Kiribati, Kiribati has 3 pieces of exclusive economic zone. It's the only nation that has territory in all 4 hemispheres of the planet. All of its islands are atolls. It's about 100,000 people. All are under threat from climate change impacts. And it's Phoenix, and you can't fly between these. To get to different parts of Kiribati and its different domain, you have to go either to Fiji or the United States. It has over 3 million square kilometres of ocean domain. It has 1 police boat, maritime police boat. The Phoenix Islands here in Pippa, the Phoenix Islands protected area occupies about half of that domain. And Pippa is as much about economy as it is about conservation. But what do we know about these islands? 8 islands and 2 submerged reefs in the heart of the oldest and deepest part of the Pacific. There's been human interaction with these islands for many hundreds of years. Polynesian Marae dated from AD 50 to 1500, Micronesian visitors. The catastrophe 1 was humans didn't survive this area well. It goes through periodic droughts. Catastrophe 2, rats were introduced, the Polynesian Kiori, and that had devastating effects on nesting seabirds on these atolls. Catastrophe 3 and 4 were in the 17 and 1800s, sail whaling, particularly for sperm whales. That map shows an aggregation of sperm whales that were taken by the sail whalers in the 1800s. Many got wrecked and more rats, particularly shipwreck, got introduced to these islands. In more than 10 scientific expeditions starting from 2001 to these islands, only last year have we sighted sperm whales again. And we were wondering, where have all the sperm whales gone? Likely due to a lot of illegal whaling by the Soviet Union and others right up into the 70s. Catastrophe 5 and 6, guano mining changed the landscape. USA and United Kingdom were fighting over these islands, and there were coconut plantations, some of these oil palm plantations. Eric, I very much enjoyed your talk last night. Gave me a new perspective on how I look at coconuts. Many of these islands, coconuts did not naturally occur. Catastrophe 7, it was in the flying boat area. I'm sure you've all heard of Amelia Earhart. She was lost in the Phoenix Islands, believed to have been lost on Nukumaroro. Catastrophe 8 and 9, the UK settled the Kiribati, the Gilbertese, in the late 1930s on 3 islands in droughts. And in the 50s, these places were abandoned. World War II, it was that one of the islands, Canton, was a military base, and it was critical between the Americans and New Zealand, and it was bombed by the Japanese 3 times. At the end of the World War II, they just dumped all the munitions and equipment off the edge of the reef. We know today that a lot of these sources of ions for reefs are incredibly important and problematic sources of pollution to coral reefs. It was also used as a vehicle tracking station, one of the islands, right up until the 1960s. Catastrophe 11, 12 and 13, Kiribati resettled the islands. They called it the Kai Kai scheme. They abandoned it again, perhaps not learning from history, but these are at the margins of human settlement, these islands in the most remote part of the Pacific. Along this time too, we had a rise in tuna fishing, and it continues to rise. Illegal shark finning, illegal fishing, boats wrecked on the reef, introducing even more species of rats, which create problems for the wildlife there, some of the most important seabird nesting sites in the Pacific. Then in 2006, Kiribati took a major step. It announced the Phoenix Islands Protected Area and began planning and designing it. In 2008, it legally established PIPA, and that is the boundary you can see of the Phoenix Islands today. It is approximately 50% of their exclusive economic zone. It is the world's largest and deepest World Heritage Site. And to give you a sense of scale, PIPA is about the size of the state of California. And if you recall, I said that Kiribati has about 100,000 people, and it has 1 maritime police boat. How on earth did they take it on? It was a bit of bravery and bravado, and a bit of the sense of build it and they will come, and fostering partnerships, and it has worked. And it's an ongoing piece of work. PIPA is defined by its eight islands, atoll and reef islands that sit on top of seamounts. It has important deep areas. It has incredibly important seamount systems, things that we're finding out right through today in terms of the research. It's becoming one of the world's most globally important sites for research for coral reefs and climate change, because you can do research there in the virtual absence of any other human stressor. So for example, 2 bits of news from the research this year is that some of these wrecks that I mentioned that release iron to the reef and create what we call black reefs and reefs that die are increasing. We couldn't work out why, and Woods Hole and New England Aquarium are promoting a theory that as the ocean warms, all these wrecks are releasing iron faster and they're causing growth of cyanobacteria and they're killing the reefs. Another impact of climate change. Now I can't show you now, but there are maps of all the wrecks in the Pacific. There are thousands of them. They are time bombs, both polluting from oil, and now as the ocean warms, it appears we're going to have an increase in an additional threat of black reefs. That's the bad news. But I have some good news as well from climate change. It appears from research there, and this is very new news that's not being published, is that these corals in places like Pippa are naturally adapted to thermal stress because they periodically are in very warm conditions in the natural phenomenon of El Nino, and it's been the strongest El Nino this year that we've ever experienced. And yes, they bleach, but they show the world's fastest recovery to coral bleaching. And they show an interesting adaptation, and I was trying to explain it to one of our donors, and I've come up with this explanation because I'm not a coral reef scientist. Pippa has fat corals, and in times of stress, thermal stress, these corals hibernate. And if the stresses are too long or too frequent, they can bounce back. And they bounce back very quickly, notably because they're not dealing with other stresses caused by humans. So Pippa is a very important site for climate change research. In the first 10, I'm just going to go back a slide. In the first 10 years, from 2006 to the end of 2015 until today, Pippa successfully implemented its first management plan. It created marine reserves of islands and reefs and coastal zones out to 12 nautical miles, around 7 of its 8 islands. Nothing else touches that in terms of marine reserve area in our region. It successfully implemented that, restored 3 of the 8 islands by removing invasive species, vegetation, seabirds coming back strongly, still got a job to do. But Kiribati with partners successfully implemented its first management plan. It's now in its second management plan, and I want to now turn to tuna. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a map of the Pacific to give you a bit of bearings, and I hope my video is going to work shortly. Is these concentrations, and the more white, are fishing vessels. This is a measurement called IAS, Automatic Identification System. Just as a note, it doesn't mean there's no fishing near. Some of those areas belong to the United States, and the United States at this time, when this data was done, I believe it's going to change, does not require its vessels to carry AIS when they are in domestic United States waters. Message I'd like you to take away from this slide is there's a lot of fishing going on in the Central Pacific. American, Korean, Chinese, Taiwanese, Thai, a lot of fishing. Let's hone in a bit, and you all might think that that's Pippa, but it's not. That's Howland and Baker of the Felix Islands that belong to the United States, and as I mentioned, their boats don't carry IAS. There is fishing going on there. Pippa is here. There's the boundary of Pippa, and if you can see around the islands, those are the initial 12 nautical mile exclusion zones, complete reserves, complete shutdown. So that's showing to me that they were working. That's no small feat for a country like Kiribati to pull off, and indeed protected over 80% of the priority habitats and species. Putting the exclusive economic zones on top of this, and by the way, this is technology pioneered by Google and others. Here's Pippa's boundary, here's the Felix Islands EEZ. There is a lot of fishing going on in here, including in the high seas, billions and billions of dollars worth of tuna every year. How can a nation, in its second management plan of a large-scale MPA, possibly hope to achieve change? Well, I'm pleased to report good news because it did. And now I'm hopeful that this video is going to work. Because again, here we have Pippa, here we have pre-closure, which was around October 2014. At the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, Phoenix Islands excluded all commercial fishing, all within this. Did these fishing boats respect that and leave? Now I'm wondering, it did work in the setup, I'm wondering whether this is going to work. It's not. Trapped. The video has let me down. If I could show this video from October 2014 to early 2015, believe me, and you can go online and go search for Sky Truth and you'll see this video. Inside the Pippa box, it goes dark. All the fishing boats left. That is an amazing ocean change by one of the world's smallest and poorest nations to achieve that with one fishing patrol boat. A lot of work, a lot of planning, but they did it, and it is sustained today, and we have Sky Truth and Google and Oceania watching this independently of our work with Kiribati, and they're using it as a case study that these things... Oh, will it work? Oh, great. There, 2015. If you just replay that, thank you very much. Because ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how many of you spend time in the ocean, but that is historic. That was described by Professor Daniel Pauly, who's one of the most preeminent fisheries biologists and conservationists on the planet today, as the most historic conservation act in history, done by one of the smallest and poorest nations in the world. It is sustained today. And yes, there has been infractions, and they have been caught. More than $2 million worth of fines. And the combined network of remote surveillance and cooperation and independent tools such as this IAS Sky Truth Oceania system gives us confidence that it can be done. Pippa has been a pioneer in this. Why is this important? Why is Kiribati so important? Just as one example for ocean management, here in 2014, before Pippa closed, this is the world's total catch of tuna. This is from the Pacific Islands region, Western Pacific Ocean. Much greater than from the Indian Ocean, the Eastern Pacific Ocean, or the Atlantic Ocean combined. This is a globally important food commodity. Pippa is part of Kiribati's strategy for insurance of this commodity for their income and for their food security. Why is Kiribati so important? Have a look at this graph. This is pre-Pippa closing. The Indian Ocean, here's Kiribati's EEZ. Kiribati has less than 1% of the world's ocean. 2014, it supplied more than 18% of the world's tuna. Much of it to the Americas, much of it to Asia. If we can do this in the heart of the Pacific, in the world's richest tuna ground, where boats, like you saw those lights, are fiercely competing for these resources, it is seen as a beacon of hope. And Pippa has inspired many other Pacific Island nations and to make their own commitments to the oceanscape and to large-scale MPAs in a manner suitable to their own issues. But this was historic to get the SPA with Kiribati and the Phoenix Islands. Credit due to many, many people, but particularly to the government of Kiribati. The Phoenix Islands Protected Area, today the world's largest and deepest World Heritage Site in the heart of the Pacific, is a beacon of hope to ocean management globally. Kiribati has shut down half of its EEZ of the Phoenix. It still fishes and sells fishing rights in the other half, and we're hoping in a few years' time that this will generate even more income than before Pippa was closed from these fishing fees, because with this protected area, we hope that the added benefit and spillover effect and experiment in progress for migratory species like tuna will mean that companies will fight even more fiercely for the right to fish in the Phoenix EEZ outside of PIPA, and will pay a premium fee to do so. So this is an economic model of success for Kiribati. It's not just about conservation. What key lessons in that one example of moving to scale in ocean conservation in the last decade, and I will wrap up now, I appreciate your patience, we started late and we need to wrap up. What's caused this change? 2005, thank God for the Aussies. 2015, our ocean is changing and people and countries are waking up and fostering stewardship at scale. That is not to negate all the wonderful small-scale MPAs. They are important. But if we're going to achieve ocean conservation, we need to ramp up large-scale MPAs. MPAs like PIPA can work. This world's smallest and poorest nation could do it. Why can't more of us do it? These MPAs can become core business tools of managing our ocean, from the coast to EEZs and of course to high seas. Pacific Island states are increasingly committing to large-scale management, including MPAs. That's great, that's our decade of change, and more change is to come, and it's wonderful to be part of that and to invest in it. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not sufficient. It won't change the game, finally, of needing to conserve our oceans. And in the next 10 years, I predict that we'll see a new era of whole domain management, from ridge to reef to ocean, based on a simple premise of use some, save some, which is very much a Pacific Island way, of why wouldn't you plan and manage what you own, including this ocean domain. This is starting now as some of these newer commitments are starting at their whole domain level, such as Palau, New Caledonia, and Cook Islands. But what tools are needed to make these successful? Well, I don't have time, ladies and gentlemen, to talk much about this new area of what we're calling whole domain management, but if any of you are going to SCB's Oceania meeting next week, we are co-hosting the world's first whole domain management workshop, taking the lessons of large-scale MPAs and other tools and working alongside some example countries to see what tools will work to manage and plan their ocean domain. Here is the potential currently of large-scale MPAs. Up to 28 sites now, and this is part of a big ocean network that we've helped foster, the world's only network of large-scale MPAs dedicated to sharing experience and learning. We're up to 28 sites in the world now, about 17.3 million square kilometres, about 4.8% of the ocean. The way we're interacting with our ocean, at least in our EEZs, is changing. A lot more needs to come. This ocean is big. A wider view of the Pacific. Indeed, the world's oceans cover 361 million square kilometres. 10% is 36 million square kilometres. We're at less than 20 in the world's biggest ocean in terms of commitments to conservation. This 10% is the Aceh target under the CBD. So, Conservation Asia, focusing in on EEZs in your region. How about some large-scale MPAs? Your neighbours in the east are gathering experience. I hope for any of you young folks that are looking to careers, the ocean is a growing career space. It needs science, it needs investment, it needs you. And we need to really, in this era of climate change, stand up and focus on what was a wonderful vision in the 70s of the law of the sea and get the balance right in the ocean. The balance between exploring, would love to see that move from 1% in our region. A balance of exploiting. I'm not about not fishing. I eat fish. In Samoa, the Apia's strongest fishing community. So I'm not about not exploiting. Conserving. I've given you a decade of change and an example with PIPA where countries and communities and people are stepping up to conserve their ocean and manage out of the box, out of your comfort zone, in an integrated way. Let's get the balance right. We're trying to do it in the east. I'm sure here in the west of the Pacific Ocean, you have similar challenges, and I would love to hear about some of them. That's me done for the evening. Whaftai tali tali lava. Thank you for your patience. I know I'm competing with beer and wine. And for anyone who would like to talk more about the Pacific Ocean, of which you are all part, I would love to talk to you more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, for that very enlightening and inspirational and motivating talk. We did start a little bit late. I do know we're very close to 7 o'clock now, and you do probably want beer and wine and food. However, let's just take a few minutes. If somebody do have questions, please go to the microphones up on the aisles, and Sue will be happy to answer. Any questions? No questions. Just food needed. All right, one question.
Hi, thank you for that fantastic talk. Really, I learned a lot from it, and I really appreciate the work that's been going on in the Pacific Islands. My question is about large MPAs. How do you see this type of model working in a region like Southeast Asia, where the political map is quite different, and you have more contested claims over water?
It won't be straightforward. In the terrestrial, I'm going to turn to the terrestrial environment. In the terrestrial environment, in areas where there were a lot of contested claims, notably in Central Europe, some of these areas became peace parks. Certainly countries fiercely in this region and everywhere in the world are claiming their EEZs, are claiming their domain, are claiming seabeds and extensions, based on the continental shelf. But I don't believe that unless they develop an attitude and a tool base for conserving some of those domains and cooperating with their neighbours, unless that happens, I think they will all lose. It's that simple. So my hope, perhaps, is that some of these contested areas of these lines in the ocean become marine peace parks, perhaps. But I would encourage all countries that claim domain to have a common sense basis of use some, save some, and fulfill the rights and obligations of UNCLOS. And those 4 key legs, in my view, if a country's not moving to conserving some of these areas and creating MPAs or sanctuaries or other measures, they are not fulfilling the rights and responsibilities of UNCLOS. And this needs to change.
Thank you very much for this inspirational journey through time. So in this 30 years, climate has changed, oceans has changed, according to biodiversity has changed. But I'm wondering, how did people's perception of women conservation scientists has changed? Or, in other words, how did the challenges of being a woman conservation scientist has changed during this time?
Of the conservation scientists or people more in general in the Pacific?
Well, especially as a woman doing conservation, being a woman in conservation science, actually.
Okay, I think I understand your question. For the Pacific, firstly, for people, this actually wasn't a new concept. What was new when we started the Oceanscape is that most people didn't realise they had an EEZ. They certainly knew about the...
The question was how is being a female scientist, how is being a woman scientist?
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat? It's very hard to hear in this room.
Okay, sorry. So my question is about how the challenges of being a woman scientist has changed in this last 30 years.
Oh, okay. Oh, gosh, I've never thought of that. Well, I was a scientist once, and I moved into conservation. So I'll answer it being a woman conservationist and a woman scientist. I think it's an advantage. I'll tell you a little story why I think it's an advantage. And this story applies to villages I've worked in, Samoa or Palau. One of my first jobs out of university was a terrestrial job. And we got to survey all the bush in Northland in New Zealand on private land, trying to create a terrestrial protected area network outside the government-owned land. There are only 2 women out of 12 surveyors on that team, and that's where I learnt my first advantage being a woman, is what we were the only ones that ever got invited into the farm home to talk. And when we started talking, that led to these covenants of what was quite important forest protection on private land. The guys never got invited in for tea and scones. That led to quite a lot of conservation in Northland, and that's nearly 30 years ago. Fast forward to working in villages in places that are very male dominated, be it science or talking conservation. I suppose it can be a disadvantage sometimes. I choose not. Certainly when I started, there wasn't many women in these fields of science and conservation. I see less and less barriers to that. I think when you're trying to negotiate conservation outcomes, please men all close your ears and only the woman listen. It's an advantage being a woman because they perceive you as less of a threat and are more open to that dialogue. And that dialogue is a dialogue that leads to change. So as a woman, I think it's been more an advantage to work in conservation and in science, or I choose to use it as an advantage. I'm not really sure I answered your question.
No, I think,
I hope and encourage, and I particularly do in the Pacific Islands, I target mentoring Pacific Island women to be in science and to be in conservation. And I've got some wonderful dear friends and colleagues that I've been able to contribute a little bit to their careers, who I work with across these island states. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're ready to wrap up the session, so I just want to give Sue a little present for being here with us today and talking. And then there's just a few more housekeeping announcements, so please stay sitting for a few minutes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for not running away for alcoholic beverages. Couple of notes on the capacity building and the judging. So many of the students here have done a fantastic job today, but we are still looking for judges for tomorrow. So all of you who are able to judge will have been sent a link, and we have forms attached to the doors and a box near registration. So if you receive that email, please look online, and if you see a student you can judge, it would be fantastic if you did it. If you signed up to any of the training sessions, so we've got 3 sessions tomorrow lunchtime, 3 the next day, and a fantastic game tomorrow evening, please try and be as on time as you can be. We appreciate that you're going to things here and then you have lunch, but do try and be as on time as you can. It doesn't matter if you're a bit late, but do your best. And those of you who are in the mentoring session and haven't yet met your mentor, or those of you who would like to take part and didn't sign up, please stay in here for a little bit afterwards so we can get you started, and then I promise you can go and drink as much as you can find in Newtown. So thank you, everyone.